Hi, it's Brad Truex from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. Last week we did a video on mosquitoes. Today we're going to learn about your best friend at getting rid of mosquitoes, and that's the bat. 20 to 25% of all mammals in the world are bats. That's second only to rodents. There are over 1,400 species of bats, but most of these are in the tropics. Actually, here in New Hampshire, we only have about 8 species of bat. And remember, bats are mammals. They have hair and they're warm-blooded and they feed milk to their young. Bats are flying mammals of the order Chiroptera, and Chiroptera means hand wing. I'll explain that in just a minute. The forelimb has what look like fingers, and these control the wing. And basically, this allows much more control than birds have of their wings. And again, these are the only mammals that are capable of true and sustained flight. And some of them can fly up to 100 miles per hour. This is basically showing what the wing of the bat looks like. Again, Chiroptera means hand wing. If you look at this, you can see what look like fingers. This is a model over here. And again, the wing looks like a hand with 4 extended fingers covered by a cutaneous membrane and a short thumb. And again, this makes them very dexterous in flight, actually much better at flight. They can do things that birds cannot do in flight. The bats in New Hampshire, there are basically 8 species here. Here they're listed. Not particularly important that you know each individual species. The bats range in size from very small, less than 2 inches, and weighing less than 3 grams, and having a wingspan of only 6 inches, to a whopping 3.5 pounds and a wingspan of more than 5 feet. Of course, we don't have any of those bigger bats here in New Hampshire. Some people classify bats as microbats versus megabats. Here in New Hampshire, they're mostly microbats. Some also classify them as insect eating versus fruit eating. The fruit eating bats are primarily in the tropics. And bats are the only true flying mammals. The other, quote, flying mammals really just glide. Bats are nocturnal animals. They largely avoid flying during the day so that they don't get overheated when they're in the sun. And so they sleep during the day while they're roosting. They tend to live in groups, and they hunt insects at dusk. And again, you'll often encounter them near ponds or other places that have water, since that's where there are likely to be more insects. This is showing the bats roosting. When they're not flying, they hang upside down or roost. The tendons basically allow the bats to lock their feet closed when they're hanging from a roost, and that doesn't require any muscular power. They do need muscle power to let go. And sleeping upside down allows them to quickly drop into flight, and most scientists feel that that's likely to help them avoid predators. There are also, most of the bats actually roost in trees, but others are crevice dwelling. Some bat house builders mimic crevice dwelling. Bats navigate by what's called echolocation. They emit ultrasonic sounds to produce echoes. Now, again, we as humans can't hear these ultra high frequency sounds. And again, when they're just flying at cruising speed, they only emit sounds at 10 per second. But when they're actually, they increase 200 per second. And they can also vary the wavelength. You can also use the Doppler effect. If you remember your physics, the Doppler effect basically is that sound has different characteristics when it's coming toward you as opposed to going away from you. But these features allow them to construct an incredible image of their environment and their prey, despite having only limited visual acuity at nighttime. By the way, the phrase blind as a bat probably is not accurate, because bats probably actually do have good vision. It's just that at nighttime, you can't see very well. Bats are polygamous. They mate in late summer to early fall, but the females use a variety of mechanisms to delay delivery of the pups until there's an adequate food supply. And that doesn't happen usually till May or June in the Northern Hemisphere. And there's usually only one pup per pregnancy. The mother cares for the pup, although other females will often join in. And there are often maternity colonies where the female bats group together to provide increased warmth for the pups. And the young can fly as early as 18 days, but full weaning may take up to 80 days. The lifespan of a bat is 20 to 30 years. Actually, the oldest known bat is about 41 years old. And cave roosting bats tend to live longer. And that probably simply means that they're less vulnerable to predation. What do bats eat? Well, they eat insects. And again, they can eat up to 50% of their weight in insects each day. And again, even more if it's a female who's got pups. And they may eat other things like fruit and nectar and pollen. And again, remember, many of the bats in the tropics are fruit eating bats primarily. And then when they eat fruit, they can poop out the seeds, so that helps them disseminate plants. And some of the larger species may even eat some small vertebrates. There are predators for the bat, mostly raptors like owls and hawks, but also cats and raccoons can eat bats. In the south, crocodiles and snakes and parasites, and of course, humans. Spelunkers who enter a cave in winter will arouse the bats, and that causes them to expend energy, and that can exceed their stores and cause starvation. In winter, the bats have two options. They can either migrate, and again, 3 of the New Hampshire species migrate south in winter, or they can hibernate. And again, the remaining 5 New Hampshire species primarily hibernate here in winter. And the hibernation period is from November to April. There might be also a hybrid approach where they do go south and then partially hibernate. So this is showing bats hibernating in a cave. And again, bats are true hibernators. They hibernate in caves or mines, and they really severely shut down their metabolism. Their body temperature drops from nearly 100 degrees down to less than 40 degrees, and their heart rate amazingly drops from 200 to 300 beats per minute down to 10 beats per minute. Their breathing rate drops down to one breath every 15 minutes. That's incredible. So to prepare for hibernation, they have to increase their body weight by 25% in the fall. But they have a very narrow margin of error. If they gain more than that 25% of body weight, they can't fly. They're actually too heavy to fly. So bats hibernating, there are actually 2 types of hibernators. In New Hampshire, they're mainly cave hibernators. And the hibernacula have very stable temperatures, usually between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and a very high humidity over 80%. And those conditions help protect the bats from freezing or dehydrating during the long winter months. The mine hibernators generally migrate elsewhere. White nose syndrome is the biggest killer of bats around the world, and it's caused by a fungus. Millions of bats around the world have actually died due to white nose syndrome. Again, it's caused by a fungus, but the fungus itself probably doesn't kill the bats. What happens is that it affects them during hibernation when they had shut down their metabolic activity to a real minimum. And the irritation of the fungal infection on their nose actually wakes them up. And when they wake up, their temperature and their heart rate go up, and this causes expenditure of energy. So they have to use up their fat reserves, and basically they starve before spring arrives. So what about bats? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, the good is obviously they eat lots of pest insects. So that reduces our need for pesticides. It reduces many mosquito-borne diseases. Bat dung can actually be a fertilizer, and some people actually eat bats. The bad is that they can transmit diseases like rabies, histoplasmosis, or some other diseases. And again, they're a reservoir for many viruses, including coronaviruses. I think all of you know that one of the theories about the recent coronavirus epidemic was that it began in bats in the wet markets in China. Again, coronaviruses were common in bats, and it looks like they may have transmitted to humans. And again, the ugly is the white nose syndrome. So, what are the benefits of bat? The bats are primary predators of night-flying insects like mosquitoes. And just one little brown bat can catch 1,000 or more mosquito-sized insects in an hour. Bats also eat other pests, mainly some beetles and some worms. And it's estimated that bats can save $1 billion a year in pesticide costs and $3 billion in overall agricultural costs annually in the United States. Actually, some people say that may be an underestimate and that it may be as much as $57 billion annually that they actually save. And moreover, many of the insects learn to avoid areas where they can hear those bad echolocation sounds. And bats are also good pollinators, and bats also spread seeds, disperse seeds when they eat fruits. And again, without them, we'd actually have fewer bananas, avocados, mangoes, figs, nuts, cacao, which is a predecessor of chocolate, and many other things. And again, bat guano is a powerful fertilizer. So, what happens if you have bats in your house? Well, first of all, don't touch them or handle them because of the potential for rabies. Leave the doors and windows open in that room. They'll probably find their way out, but close the doors that are leading to other rooms and turn off the lights in the room where the bats are. And if you do have to handle a bat with your bare hands, or if you find a bat flying around a room where a child is sleeping, you should call your doctor and notify the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services Bureau of Infectious Disease Control, and the phone number is listed there. And don't release the bat because you want to be able to test it for rabies if you have it. So, what if you have bats in your attic? Well, you probably shouldn't try to remove the bats from mid-May to mid-August. If you seal up your attic before the pups are ready to leave, they'll either be trapped and die there, or they'll find their way into living spaces in your house, or the mother bats will fly back into your home looking for the pups. So during July, what you should do is look where the bats are exiting at dusk so that you know which holes you're going to need to seal. And keep in mind that bats are very small, and moreover, they're very good at inserting themselves into relatively small holes. So you really have to pay attention to see which holes they're going in and out of your attic from. And then in August, when the bats are ready to leave, you can begin to bat-proof your structure through exclusion. And by exclusion, we often use what are called one-way doors to make sure that the bats are out before you seal those holes. And you can either do this yourself or you can hire a licensed wildlife control operator. So, what can you do to help bats? You can build a bat house. And again, you can turn your lights off at night. And especially remember, don't disturb them when they're in their caves or other places where they're hibernating. How do you build a bat house? Well, the bat house needs to be the right size and location. And there's actually a bat house builder's handbook. And you can go there for details of how to build the best houses. And those bat houses that you do build also need proper maintenance because, again, wasps may nest there in the winter. So you have to check out the bat house in the spring, make sure there are no wasp nests in there. And you may need to check the caulking to make sure that it's still functioning. So if you want to learn more about bats, there are some resources you can go to. One is the Bat Conservation International. The other is New Hampshire Fish and Game. They both have very good sites. So that's all about bats. Hopefully, you've learned a little bit about the bats, and we'll see you again next time.